Hello, friends. Tonight, we present to you our conversation with Mr. David Burke. As many of you know, we've long sought an opportunity to speak with this incredible actor. And after years of lost communications and dead ends, a few weeks ago, our producer David Yule was finally able to secure some time for us with the man himself. David Burke played the character of Dr. John Watson on the Granada Sherlock Holmes series from 1984 to 1985. For 13 incomparable episodes, he shared the screen with Jeremy Brett and reinvented the character of Watson into a respectable, intelligent, likable, and empathetic man, a significant departure from the screen depictions of old and the new standard for portrayals to come. Our conversation took place at his bucolic cottage home in Kent, where he and his wife, Anna Calder-Marshall, treated us with such warmth and kindness that an entire podcast could be devoted to a retelling of that day. And we will certainly be discussing it again. But suffice to say, we intended to rush in on our best behavior, but ended up spending the entire day with David and Anna and becoming fast friends with these two exceptional people. Together, they regaled us with stories and memories from their time with the Granada series. We even spoke at length with Anna about her time on The Eligible Bachelor, but we'll be saving that very special part of the conversation for a later day. At the age of 88, Mr. Burke has had his share of health-related trials and tribulations, but we are happy to report that during our visit, he was in great spirits and still just as impressive a man as he was when he donned his pipe and pen back on Baker Street so many years ago. And just one final note, we wanted to extend a true nod of gratitude to our Patreon patrons. Our ability to make this trip to England was a direct result of your continued support. Without you, this interview could never have happened. So we thank you once more. And now, we give you Mr. David Burke. Well, David, my dear sir, I'm not going to lie to you. We're absolutely thrilled to be talking with you today. So thank you for sharing your time with us. It's very much appreciated. Before we dive into all things Sherlockian, we would really love to hear a bit about your beginnings, if you wouldn't mind. I'd like to start at the beginning. Could you tell us a little bit about your parents, where you grew up?
Well, I was born in Liverpool in 1934. My father was a steward on board ships going in and out of Liverpool. Both of my parents were Irish and from the same part of Ireland, namely County Cork. There was no previous record of acting talent in the family. And although it was a secret ambition of mine to become an actor, I kept very quiet about it. And nobody guessed until I sprang it on them later on. My father said, "What do you intend to do with your life?" And I said, "I'd like to be an actor, following the steps of Laurence Olivier." He didn't approve of this at all. But several days later, he said, "Sir David, this Oliver you talked about, he makes quite a lot of money, doesn't he?" I said, "Yes, I believe so." And he said, "Oh, well, you should be all right then."
You went to Oxford, is that correct?
That's correct.
Is that when you started acting? Was it at Oxford?
I did a little bit of acting when I was at school in Liverpool. I used to go and watch performances by a repertory company who were stationed at the Playhouse, and to me this was absolute magic. I would pay sixpence, it was very cheap, to sit up in the gallery. The curtain would go up, the lights would go down, and I would be in heaven.
Wonderful. How did the part come your way? Do you know who approached you about playing Dr. Watson?
Well, the producer was Michael Cox, and he had been at Oxford at the same time as me. And I guess he might have seen me in a couple of student productions there. And he remembered me, and I think he felt I was ordinary enough to play Dr. Watson. I found when it was announced that I was to play Watson, people kept coming up to me and saying, "David, this is wonderful. You're so right to be cast as Watson." I found this somewhat disconcerting. And I went home to my wife and I said, "I'm not sure I should accept this role." She said, "Why on earth?" I said, "Well, it seems to me he's the most ordinary man on the planet." And she said, "Well, what's your problem?"
But I did say it takes an extraordinary man to play an ordinary man.
Mm-hmm. Right.
How true. That reassured me that it was right for me to do it. I'm joking a bit about it because in actual fact it is a wonderful part. Yeah. And it is wonderful because he's so ordinary, but he's not ordinary. He has the gift of empathy, also a reservoir of feelings that meant that there was a coming together of two different dynamics. I approached the first meeting between us with some apprehension because I knew that Jeremy had been to the top school in Britain at the time, Eton College, and I was a working class boy from Liverpool, and I thought this would mean a difficulty. But in actual fact, it wasn't, and that, I believe, was because Jeremy was an enormously warm and capable person. And so it was a coming together of two like minds.
That's wonderful. So, obviously, most portrayals of Watson, up until yours, were playing him as a bit of a bumbler. You and Michael Cox made a very conscious effort to rescue the reputation of Watson. And today, that choice is looked back on and thought of as a brilliant revelation. You know, it was an amazing choice. But at the time, was it difficult to get audiences to accept your Watson?
No, it wasn't difficult because I never saw him as a buffoon. I'd always, from the beginning, saw him as an intelligent, sensitive human being. And Jeremy recognized this, and so it was coming together of like minds.
Yeah. I think in the past you've identified, and I'm sure you're correct, the real reason for the longevity of the Sherlock Holmes stories, which is the friendship at the heart of them, and the friendship between Holmes and Watson. But as you said, you and Jeremy became the greatest of friends while you were on the show. Tell us a little bit about Jeremy. Had you worked together before? When did you first meet?
No, we never worked together before. And I have to say, I was not over aware of his presence. So meeting him for the first time was a genuine meeting. I soon got to know quite a bit about his personal history. Just to give you a taste of what he was like, I'll say a little bit about his existence before Sherlock. Jeremy was born in 1933. I was born a year later. So we were quite close from the time point of view. He was christened Peter Huggins, which led to him being teased at school as Huggins, Buggins, Muggins. His mother was Elizabeth, and she was related to the Cadbury family. And she was a very kind woman. She was particularly kind to people who've suffered the wings and arrows of outrageous fortune. She died a year before he gave his Hamlet. His father was Henry. He was a high-ranking officer in the First World War and in the Second World War. He was very disappointed when Jeremy announced that he wanted to be an actor. Henry would have rather he became a soldier. His brothers were also disappointed with Jeremy's choice. However, there were several hurdles to be negotiated before he could become an actor. You see, he was unfortunate enough to be infected with rheumatic fever while he was still at school at Eton. And this led to an enlarged heart, which took centre stage several years later, when in fact he died of a heart attack.
Yeah. The question everyone always asks is, why did David Burke decide to depart the show? And as fans, we all know the answer to this. You had a chance of a lifetime to join Royal Shakespeare Company with Anna, and your young son Tom, spend time with him, and you had so many successes following your departure, too many to count. But I think the fans also wonder, as the years went on, was there ever any tinge of regret for you not being able to continue to build the character, anything like that?
I'm really glad you've asked this question, because what happened was after a day's filming on one of the episodes, we were travelling back to Granada studios, and Jeremy said to me, "Dear heart," he was inclined to use flowery language like that. He said, "Dear heart, we must expect Granada to come knocking on our door very soon to ask if we can do another series. We must not go down that road. It would be a mistake." And I simply said, "I see." I didn't pass any comment on it. But I rang Anna that evening, and bear in mind that she had a small baby in this beautiful but isolated cottage. And I said, "Darling, good news. Jeremy says we must not do a second series." And I said it was good news, not because I didn't enjoy playing Watson. I did, I enjoyed the whole journey, but I knew that it was hard on her to live in such an isolated spot with a newborn baby. Now, fast forward several weeks, months, and lo and behold, as Jeremy had projected, we were asked to do a second series. And bearing in mind what Jeremy had told me, I said, "Thank you, but no thank you." And that's how it came about. So Jeremy, I hate to put it this way, but he had only himself to blame. He shouldn't have pushed that boat out.
Yeah.
Jeremy loved playing Sherlock Holmes, but he did not like Sherlock Holmes. Mm-hmm. And frequently and publicly declared, he said, I would not cross the road to say hello to him if he appeared. Mm-hmm. He thought Sherlock Holmes was dark and cold and nasty. Mm-hmm. He used a very strong image. He said, dealing with Sherlock Holmes was like lifting a cowpat and finding underneath the white tendrils of grass growing up. He put it much more elegantly than that, but it still was a very nasty image.
Yeah.
And I do, as an actor, understand the joy of playing nasty people. There was a weight of responsibility on him, which I can totally sympathise with. He had a much harder job than I had. For one thing, he had much more to say. He was in the various plays to a great extent. I mean, he was in every scene. Yeah. And he was not a young man any longer. And in order to be on top of it, and it's a sort of part that you had to look as though you're in control. And he used to find it difficult to sleep, so he used to drink champagne to help himself to sleep.
Yeah.
Do you think you would have carried on as Watson had Jeremy not said what he said to you?
I think so. I can't swear that would. But put it this way, it would have been far more difficult for me to refuse it.
But it is true that you received a very nice offer from the RSC for the two of you.
We were offered to do a play called Philistines by Maxim Gorky, a very good play and nice parts for us to play.
Yeah. Well, you famously put forth Ted Hardwicke's name to take your place. That's how you kind of suggested he was the one, yeah?
Yes, well, Anna was working with Ted Hardwicke at the time.
Was it Titus Andronicus?
Might have been.
I think that's what Prim says.
Okay.
Yeah. We had worked with Edward Hardwicke. He had directed us in Fleeing area.
Yes. That's right.
And you thought he would be very good and put his name forward.
I have to confess, I haven't seen any of Ted's Sherlock Holmes, but I felt he was the correct casting for it.
Did you and Ted ever get together and discuss the character?
No.
So you didn't give him any sage advice?
Oh, no, I wouldn't have dreamt of doing such a thing. That was a bit wicked of you to ask.
Well, you were the elder statesman in that sense. You had played the role.
I've never been called an elder statesman.
Until now.
I think I must have achieved some sort of immortality.
You have.
We've heard stories from many cast members over the years, usually in later episodes, that Jeremy was known to be quite lively at the local pub or the hotel following a good shoot, at a rap party or such. We've heard stories of him singing loudly and getting up on tables and things like that. Do you have any recollection of that kind of thing?
Oh, yes. Embarrassed recollection. I don't know whether the occasion was my birthday or what it was.
I came to join you. I think it was your birthday.
Were you there when
I
you
was
stood
there,
on the table?
and he serenaded you.
Yes. That was embarrassing. I should have been flattered, instead of which I was embarrassed. But it was well meant.
Do you remember what he sang to you?
Well, I was looking at my diary, because I kept a diary intermittently when I was doing Sherlock Holmes. And I wrote in my diary about this occasion when he jumped on the table and sang. And he brought Annie into it. Oh, Annie and Tom, I miss you so much. He'd obviously done some homework.
I didn't mind.
So he made the song up for you?
Yes.
He made the song up.
Yeah.
That's great.
He improvised it. I also talk in the diary about he had to meet someone in the BBC canteen. Sorry, it wasn't the BBC, Granada.
Mm-hmm.
The canteen, which was on the top floor, had lots of tables, rather like that, plastic.
Mm-hmm.
He brought in a beautiful tablecloth, put it over little vase with some forget-me-nots, a candelabra with candles in which he lit. This is in the middle of a working restaurant.
Yeah.
Flamboyant.
It's endearing.
Yeah.
What did he used to say about the weather?
He believed in celebrating life more than anybody I've ever known. We'd be in the makeup chair, say 8 o'clock in the morning, and he would come in, it would be pissing with rain outside, and he'd come in and he'd say, "David, it's wonderful, wonderful day out there." And I would say, "Jeremy, it's pissing with rain." He'd say, "Yes, but the quality of the air is so much more wonderful when it's raining." So you couldn't put him down. He was determined to celebrate life, and he did. And he was a great lesson to us all in his ability to fly in the face of doom and gloom and choose to celebrate instead.
Obviously, later, Jeremy would become more troubled with his health than he was when you were filming with him. How close did you guys remain in those later years?
Not at all. I think that's just acting. You know, you do a job, you engage with whoever, you have intimate moments on camera, then the job ends and you say, "See you, darling." A couple of years ago, when I was still acting regularly, I did a television, I can't remember what it was, Midsummer Murders. There was an actress in it called Caroline Blakiston. The last time we had worked together was 50 years. 50 years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the sign of an incredible career, 50 years in between collaborations. That's amazing. When was the last time you spoke to Jeremy?
I can't remember. I saw very little of him after we parted company. And he was very busy.
Yeah.
And I was very busy on the stage at the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Yeah.
So we parted.
Did you ever reconnect with anyone else from the Granada show in later years? I'm thinking of like Charles Gray or Rosalie Williams. Did you ever talk to them much after the fact?
No, I didn't. The one thing I remember about Charles Gray was that he had a flat close to Harrods, and he became very friendly with Ava Gardner.
Oh, yeah.
And Ava Gardner had come to live in London, and she had a black lady who looked after her, sort of secretary come, cleaner come. And she told Charles this story, that she was in the flat one day, and she said to this lady, who we'll call Bessie, "Bessie, you think it's too early for a gin and tonic?" And Bessie said, "Gin don't know the time of day, Miss Gardner." I love that.
There's quite a few episodes that you did, and I don't want to dwell on every single one, but there are a few little things that we wanted to ask you about certain ones. And The Solitary Cyclist was the very first one you guys shot, and to us, it's probably maybe our absolute favorite episode of the entire series, which is just mind-blowing to us because it's the first one that you did.
Did it feel special? Did it feel like another job, or did this feel special, this series?
It just felt like another job, really.
Yeah.
It didn't seem to me, I mean, for everybody to say, "Oh my God, you know, this is Hamlet, King Lear, and Othello rolled into one."
Well, it's definitely not that.
It was just another job, you know.
Yeah.
We know Jeremy was nervous about the role when it started, and there are stories about how he tried different things. At one point, he had a false nose, and he wore different makeup and tried different things. And in the end, all of that was discarded because I think the initial director, Paul Annette, he said, Jeremy, we don't need any of that. We just need you. I was curious, did you do any such experimentation with Watson? Were there any interesting things you tried early on that ended up being tossed out?
I don't think so, because my method, if you can call it that, as an actor, was by a process of, I'm going to be intellectual now, osmosis. I would read the play. I don't just mean the Sherlock Holmes plays. Any play, any job that I was given, I would go for long walks and I would think about it. I was learning the lines, but that's the least important part of it. I was opening myself to the energy of another person, and eventually the two psyches hopefully would come together and Watson would step out of the shadow.
Yeah.
When you first met Jeremy, did he feel like Sherlock, or did you take convincing?
When I met him, I hadn't in fact read most of the stories in the Sherlock Holmes canon. So he was just a fellow actor. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, very sadly, we lost Michael Cox last year. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about him.
He was very kind, wasn't he?
Oh, he was great. He offered me the part. I didn't have to audition or anything. He was quite a shy man and a good producer.
Yeah. We've heard so many stories that you and Jeremy had to fight hard for what you might call canonical fidelity, to stick to the original texts. And thank goodness you did, fight that fight, because that's what makes these stories stand the test of time, in my opinion. But I wanted to ask, why was it such an issue? Why were the writers constantly trying to stray away from the words of Doyle?
I suppose in a way they were only trying in their own way to do what I was doing, to draw energy from each other.
Yeah. Michael Cox wrote that you guys had a particularly heated confrontation around the filming of The Crooked Man. I don't know if you remember this one, but there was a scene in the original story that was supposed to take place under a street lamp, and they changed the entire scene to take place in a Salvation Army surplus thing. And he wrote about how, well, in his own words, you and Jeremy were on one side, and Michael Cox and John Hawksworth were on the other side, and he said blood was nearly shed. Do you remember that confrontation?
I do remember it very poignantly, because the scene under the lamplight is very moving. They wanted, and I remember it not as Michael Cox's wish, but Alan Grint, the director, who in my opinion had no empathy, sensitivity. It's one of the best scenes in that episode, and I just think it was nonsense to brutally kick it out and substitute something as ordinary, in the worst sense of that word, ordinary location. I was not in sympathy with Alan Grint. I thought he was a bad choice, and proved he was a bad choice by that act.
Was it hard to continue after having a row like that?
I think it was a bit difficult.
Yeah.
I don't know how many other episodes he directed. He was originally a cameraman.
Ah.
And I think, to be fair to him, he was trying to establish his credentials as a director as opposed to cameraman. And that wasn't his fault.
Right.
But he should have had the common sense to make way, particularly for Jeremy, because Jeremy used to carry that book wherever he went.
Mm-hmm.
He was in tune with...
Every word of Conan Doyle, really, wasn't it?
Yes, and Jeremy was in the habit of checking back with Conan Doyle's daughter.
Right.
He would ring her up and tell her about developments. I don't know whether he did on this particular occasion.
Yeah.
We had heard about something called the Baker Street File. Does that ring a bell?
Yes.
That was something that Jeremy would supposedly carry around as well, and I wondered if you had a copy of that.
I did, and I don't know where it's gone. We have a lot of books, and I think it's somehow stuck somewhere up there.
Somewhere in the treasure.
Another episode, The Naval Treaty, there's a very interesting monologue that Jeremy has around a rose. Do you remember the rose speech?
No.
But he did have an affinity, didn't he, with flowers?
He loved flowers.
He loved flowers.
He told me once that he was in the habit of sending flowers to himself with a little handwritten note thanking him for the wonderful performance that he was giving.
One of my favorite moments from the whole series is your deduction of the bowler hat in the Blue Carbuncle.
Oh, yes.
When they find the hat laying at the scene. And I think it's a great scene, but it also kind of reminds me of another subject that comes up a lot on the podcast, which is hats. We tend to comment on, and our listeners like to comment on all the various Homburgs and Deerstalkers and top hats, but also Watson's, all his bowler caps. And I wondered if you have any bowlers left. Do you still rock a bowler when you go out?
You don't.
We've still got a bowler hat.
We've actually got 2 bowler hats we used for a comedy routine, Tom and I. They were quite full of spiders the other day.
Somebody's wearing them there.
Yeah.
Do you have any recollections of that scene? Do you have any good memories of the Blue Carbuncle? That was another favorite of
I
ours.
remember enjoying the Blue Carbuncle. I think probably because it's written with a lighter touch.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not dark.
It's kind of a Christmas episode.
Yes.
It gets
that's right.
rewatched and now our listeners tell us that every year on Christmas, it's the Blue Carbuncle.
Oh, yeah.
So your final appearance in the show was in The Final Problem, which you guys shot in Meiringen, Switzerland. Some beautiful locations. Do you recall any special challenges filming up there?
I remember everybody was a bit concerned for the 2 stuntmen
Yeah.
in case something went wrong because they were on wires.
Yeah. Did you watch it happen?
Yeah, I didn't think it was... Nowadays, that would be done much better.
Right.
But everything is of its time,
Mm-hmm.
and that was how they did that.
Yeah.
And you can see the wires
Yeah.
if you
You can.
look closely.
You can. But even though you can see the wires, it's still an impressive attempt, you know?
It's a feat, and it's also
Yeah.
it's an iconic image too. You know, the 2 of them just falling. Even though it's kind of slow, it's actually kind of dreamy the way they go down. Like it has a feel. You know, it has its own feel.
One of the later episodes, The Eligible Bachelor, featured a very special guest star, your wonderful wife, Anna Calder-Marshall. Did you get to observe that production at all? Or did you visit the set or reconnect with any of the cast and crew while that was happening?
No,
No, not at all?
you've got to remember, I had a baby to look after.
Oh,
True,
Yes.
Thinking back on your time on the series, do you have a favorite episode? Do you have one that sticks out to you that's a good experience or one that just came out particularly well?
I think the Blue Carbuncle
Mm-hmm.
was probably my favourite.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about that journal you have in your hands there. When did you start keeping
I
that?
wouldn't dare let it out.
What made you decide to start writing down your thoughts?
I've always intermittently kept diaries. And I would then leave it for 6 months and not write anything, and then I'll write it down.
Yeah.
And I find I've forgotten so many things that have happened to me. And it seems a pity not to remember them.
Well, it's very wise of you to have written those things down.
Was it good memories going back to your diary?
Sometimes it's good memories. Sometimes I think, what a boring old fart I was.
What about have you told them about your stamp? When you had a stamp of you as Sherlock Holmes and you went the Labour Exchange?
This is after I finished doing it. The phone rang. I said, hello. Dear Heart, it was Jeremy. Dear Heart, do you realise that we are on a postage stamp? I said, what do you mean? He said, I mean, they have just issued a stamp commemorating the adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and they've used our faces on the stamp. I said, I'll phone you back. Put the phone down. And before you could say Jack Robinson, I was out the door, into the car, drive into Ashford, got out of the car. I went into the post office. And I said to the girl behind the counter, do you have this new stamp commemorating Sherlock Holmes? She said, yes, we do. I said, could I have a copy of it? She said, yes. And she showed the stamps across the counter to me. And I couldn't resist it. I said, that's me. And he said, oh, really? That'll be 54 pence.
Any other observations from your journal about your time with Jeremy on the show?
Jeremy, he was his own worst enemy in some respects.
Yeah.
Because, he was diagnosed as being bipolar.
Mm-hmm.
And also he was physically disabled. And Ted said that on the way into work, he would buy 3 packets of cigarettes and smoke them by the end of the day.
Yeah. Do you have any memories of Jeremy playing the violin?
Yes, I can see if I close my eyes. I can just see him. I have a story about another Midsummer Murders, actually, where I had to be a famous violinist, like Yehudi Menuhin or something like that. Had to be perfection. And I had a scene with Trevor Peacock where he played the piano and I accompanied him on the violin. Well, now, it's a simple matter for an engineer who knows what he's doing to make it so that whoever is playing the piano, but there's no sound coming because the vital thing has been switched off. So it's easy for him. But I had to play the violin. Now, there isn't any such thing as a quiet violin. And when you do that, unless you know what you're doing,
Yeah.
it goes, ah, ah, ah. And the film crew were falling off their seats. Then you watch it when it goes out,
Yeah.
and it's
magic.
perfect.
Yeah.
I'd say you're lucky if it's that musical when you're trying it.
Well, that's a good segue because I kind of want to ask you a few non-Sherlockian questions. Because in 2006, you had the opportunity to work with another Burke, your son Tom, in the number 13, the M.R. James Christmas Ghost Story.
Yeah.
I mean, that must have been great. Was that the first time you ever worked with Tom on screen?
The first time we worked together professionally, when Tom was still at school, we used to do performances in the village hall.
We'd make them up in secret, just comedy, clowning, poems. We'd do Victoria Wood sketches.
Oh, okay.
Tom was brilliant.
Brilliant. But we'd work them up over Christmas. Then we'd phone up the village hall and say, we've got a show for you, and can we transform it? And I'd transform the whole of the village hall. They said, why do you do this? Only for one night. We just wanted to give them magic, but we worked so much together as a threesome. I mean, we did show after show. We must have done about 8 or something.
Wow.
They said it's better than going to the West End.
That's great.
Oh,
Do you think Tom would ever give the role of Dr. Watson a try?
I think he has too much charisma.
I was going to say, I think he could probably play Holmes.
yes, I think so.
Yes, he actually does a speech.
Holmes as Jeremy Brett. He's incredible mimic.
Really?
And he learned it. He can do it now, but he did it for one of our shows.
Well, speaking of ghost stories, you appeared in one of my favorite spooky movies, The Woman in Black.
Well, you're talking about the film.
Yeah.
I am in about that
Yes.
much. And I have a terrible beard, which I think was artificial,
Okay.
stuck on.
How did you get involved in that?
I don't know how I got involved, because I'd done it on the stage.
As a main man.
I
Oh,
played it for a whole year.
wow.
It was terrifying.
I would love to have seen that. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, there was one moment I used to relish every night, because it was a two-hander, and we used to take it in turns to lead, as it were. And there's a moment in the play where I think a door opens and the audience sees a rocking chair.
It's terrifying.
Yes, rocking. And it's a very chilling moment. Because it wasn't just chairs rocking, but there was a scream. And it never ceased to please me when it came to that moment. They literally used to jump out of their seats.
I remember Tom remembering that and being absolutely terrified. And I had a godson who refused to go to bed on his own for a year after. I mean, it was frightening.
What year was that approximately? When
It was the year my mother died, because David was driving me and Tom backwards and forwards to Denville Hall, where actors go, sort of spaced out really, and doing a show in the West End. And then one night you had your heart went.
And I stopped the show and I stepped forward and I said, "Is there a doctor in the house?"
Oh, my.
Huge laugh.
Yeah.
I thought it was part of the show.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there was a doctor, a young doctor who was on holiday from New Zealand. And he examined me and said, "You have an uneven heartbeat. You ought to go to hospital immediately," which I did, and the show carried on.
And David phoned me from the hospital, and I said, "Aren't you on stage?" He said, "No, I'm in the hospital. I had heart problems. Don't bother to come and see me." And so I just lost my mother. So
Yeah.
Tom was born in 81. I think it'd be about 1893 that it was.
You said 1893. I think you meant to say 1993.
Yes, I did. I did. I am numerically dyslexic, but that is really, thank you.
Like Tom is an old man.
Yes.
She did that deliberately.
I didn't.
See if you're on your toes.
Well, David, what can we say? We love every episode of this show, but those first 13 that you did were such an achievement dramatically, stylistically, and just bringing the page to the screen in a way that's just never been rivaled. And we believe it will live on forever. And we just cannot thank you enough for speaking with us today. It's been incredible. Thank you so much.
Wow. I'm amazed but gratified. I can think of lots of parts that I've played that have given me a much bigger buzz than Watson. But he's a nice man, and I wish him well. I was rather dreading this session this afternoon and lost quite a bit of sleep
Oh, no.
over it. But it turned out to be a joy, and I thank you for that.